Well, joining me now to discuss that in our war room is Admiral Joe Sestak, former Navy officer and Democratic Pennsylvania congressman, and Joe Watkins, Republican strategist and former aide to President George H.W. Bush. Thank you for being with me, gentlemen.
Good to be with you, Mara.
Well, Admiral Sestak, let's start with you, and let's talk about the president's strategy here. This week, he did a bunch of local interviews. He sent out a flurry of tweets, and the White House issued a bunch of press releases, all pertaining to stopping the cuts. Next week, he takes the show on the road. He'll be traveling to Virginia on Monday in hopes of urging citizens to put pressure on Congress to stop the sequester. So why is he taking this fight directly to the public, and is that an effective strategy?
Well, I think he learned a lesson from his very first 4 years. He had been elected by a majority, obviously, including moderate Republicans. But when he went to Washington, as he said about a year ago, he found out that he couldn't change Washington from the inside. He forgot his power as a president came from the people. But at the same time, I don't think he shoots all the way over. He still has to govern, because government is for the people. And he has to sit down with the Republicans, I believe, and not have this absence of dialogues between the two parties. Because at the end of the day, the people who are going to be harmed by this are the people, because this is going to hurt. It's going to have a bad impact. And I think it isn't just about blaming the other side, when the two parties should be holding themselves responsible for having gotten us into this mess.
And Joe Watkins, conservative columnist Peggy Noonan, wrote in the Wall Street Journal this week, quote, "Mr. Obama has finally hit on his own version of national unity. Everyone gets scared together." She goes on to write that the president thrives in chaos. Do you think that the message he's really trying to convey on the road is one of fear?
I don't know that the message that he's trying to send is one of fear. Obviously, he is talking about what the cuts would mean for millions of Americans, and obviously some of the cuts would have drastic implications for lots of Americans. But I think Joe Sestak chance to let his legacy be one that he really learned how to work with Congress. I think the challenge for him going forward is not to give speeches to the public about what's wrong with Washington, but rather to do the hard work of sitting down with members of Congress, especially the opposite party, and figuring out where there's consensus, where they can agree together and move forward for the sake of the nation. It really hurts us to be in this position, as Congressman Rangel said a little bit earlier, where we're facing this kind of a sad deadline yet again. And so the president has a real opportunity, I think, to show just how great a politician he is by actually working with Republicans to cobble together an agreement that can move our nation forward.
Admiral Sestak, there's a new Bloomberg poll out that finds that 3 in 5 Americans say the deficit should be curbed through a combination of spending cuts and tax increases on companies and high earners. Mixing cuts and new revenue in order to avoid shutdown has long been President Obama's mantra. So if they don't ban and compromise on those issues, are Republicans going to lose some ground as this deadline nears?
Well, you see, I don't really think it's about either party trying to lose ground, because the people that are going to lose ground are Americans. It's us. And so I think the Simpson-Bowles Bipartisan National Debt Commission laid out a very good template. It said that we needed $2 of spending cuts for every dollar of tax revenues or closure of tax expenditures. I think that's the model. We need $4 trillion debt reduction over the next decade to have a sustainable debt to GDP ratio to where our economy is growing faster than our debt. We already have $1 trillion. 2 years ago, we got that on cuts to discretionary spending. Let's take this sequester right now. That's another $1 trillion. But instead of doing it mindlessly, where every program is cut the same, good programs, those ones that are bad ones that should be stopped, let's make sure it's selectively on the right programs. And second, get the other $2 trillion by getting it on tax expenditures as well as debt reduction by spending cuts, where it's a 2-to-1 ratio. That's the bipartisan, principled, constructive, compromise way to do it. And I think that's what the president and the Republicans should be about. Not about party again. It's merely about coming to something to where Americans might believe that the biggest deficit in America is not the debt, it's the trust deficit.
And Joe Watkins, that same Bloomberg poll also found that 55% of Americans have a favorable opinion of President Obama. That's a 3-year high. So if a deal is reached before March 1st, does he come out the political winner here?
Well, I think the president clearly is popular. He won this election pretty decisively just a couple of months ago. But for me, it's not really about popularity. I think that for anybody that's listening that knows what it takes to be a good parent, for instance, to be a good parent isn't really about being popular. It's about doing the right thing. And the same is true here for the president. He's won a second term. He can't run again for another term as president of the United States. He has a chance to do something good for this country by working hard to find ways to get past this this impasse, and to look, as Congressman Sestak said, at ways to wisely cut the deficit, where you look for ways to wisely cut spending and to see where it is revenue actually works, and to come to an agreement with Republicans right now who may be standing in the way of an agreement so that we can actually get this thing done. And he has a chance to do that. If he can get that done, whether he's popular or not, it'll be a great thing for the United States of America, a great day for us.
Now, Admiral Sestak, when it comes to scheduled cuts to the Pentagon, conservative columnist Byron York crunched some CBO numbers, and he wrote this in the Washington Examiner today, quote, under a scenario of continued war in Afghanistan and under a scenario of no war in Afghanistan and everything in between, defense spending is scheduled to rise steadily in the next decade, even with sequestration cuts. Now, sir, you were a naval officer and you sat on the Armed Services Committee. What would you say to those who argue that it's time to cut military costs anyway?
There's not a question that defense can be part of a shared sacrifice. There's not a question that the amount in the sequester can actually be taken by the Defense Department. But again, don't do it in a crazy way. Look, we know that, like, for example, in 2008, fiscal year 2008, we had $300 billion of cost overrun in our Defense Department. We actually have about 60,000 financial analysts in our Defense Department, 2,000 different accounting systems, to where Secretary Gates once said, it's a feudal system. We cannot follow the money. The Defense Department can do so much more in accountability, but the problem with the way we're doing it, where both parties came together and put a gun playing Russian roulette to our head, is saying just cut everything. And so rather than stopping a Cold War platform from being produced anymore, what they're actually going to be cutting is our satellite funding, to where we listen in to what Al-Qaeda is doing, because it's a cut across the board. Yes, you can be part of shared sacrifice in the Defense Department, but do it wisely.
And Joe Watkins, Crossroads GOP Super PAC released a new ad this week blaming the president for proposing the sequester in the first place. So let's take a quick listen to that clip.
The so-called sequester was Obama's idea in the first place. He signed it into law.
The president's part of the sequester. The White House recommended it, frankly, back in August 2011.
And it seems like every 3 months around here, there's some manufactured crisis.
Now, Joe Watkins, you just said that it's not about assigning blame, it's about doing the right thing. But now we do see so many different groups focusing on assigning blame. Are they just bracing for the fallout from this?
Well, of course, some people are looking to see how they can diminish their losses in all of this. I think that it's really, in the big picture, for the sake of Americans, it's not about assigning blame. And I think for Republicans, it's not a matter of blaming the president. I think it's more important to find a way to fix the problem. $70 billion in non-defense defense spending could be cut. There are lots of ways to get this done without pointing the finger of blame. We can actually succeed at this, but the president's got to work hard to talk to Republicans.
All right. Admiral Joe Sestak, former Pennsylvania congressman, and Joe Watkins, Republican strategist. Thank you both for being here this afternoon.
Great to be with you, Mara.
Thanks.
Well, coming up, we hop in the way.